And welcome, everyone. We'll call this meeting to order, October 15th, 2024. And please ensure your cell phones are turned off or on mute, and we'll welcome those that are participating from home. Thank our staff for being here tonight and the presenters. And we have two members of council who are not here tonight, Councillor McLeod-Haggett and Councillor Neeb. Moving right along, item number 2, please.
That South Huron Committee of the Whole approves the agenda as presented.
And a mover, please. Deputy Mayor, second by Councillor Dietrich. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Carries with 5. Thank you. Disclosure, pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Are there any disclosures from the members of the Committee of the Whole? Not seeing any. Thank you for that. We go to our reports and we welcome Alyssa and Mark from GEI Consultants, please. Whenever you're ready.
Thanks, everyone. My name is Mark Zamwich. I'm with GEI Consultants. I'm joined by Alyssa Kachansky, also of GEI. I have relatively new on the project. I think you may have met a former colleague of mine, Julian Bell, who was heavily involved in this water and wastewater master plan. So he's no longer with GEI, so I'm stepping in to help push this along and to present the results of the water wastewater master plan to you all, along with Alyssa. I'll get right into it. Basically, we're going to talk a lot about the master plan, basically summarize the plan itself, a lot of the drivers, why we did the master plan, the main results, the study process, as well as the outcomes, so the water and wastewater capital program. Go to the next slide, please. Everyone can hear me okay? Yeah, we're good. So the drivers of the master plan. First off is responsible management of growth within the municipality, looking at supporting many of the needs within the system. So development of a capital program. The master plan does drive utility rates and development charges. So how are we paying for a lot of the infrastructure upgrades? Responsible development of a long-term water distribution plan to meet the drinking water quality management system for owning and operating the drinking water system within South Huron. Planning for build-out. A lot of the water and wastewater master plans are driven by growth. So we're having new growth pockets and what infrastructure is required to responsibly support that in terms of water supply, wastewater treatment, and conveyance of that infrastructure. We also like to emphasize flexibility in servicing. So, do we need security of supply within our water system in case there's water main breaks, et cetera? Capital program development is a key piece of the water and wastewater master plan, where we look for coordination with state of good repair needs. So any ongoing works within the municipality coupled with growth, and obviously long-term visioning of a 10, 20, 30-year forecast is key to that capital program. Lastly is understanding the impacts of the cost of the infrastructure needs and how we're going to support the existing and future growth with the cost of the capital program. The objectives of the master plan, I apologize, it's a very long list. Hopefully everyone can see it okay. But essentially the objectives really were to look at the impact of the existing and growth needs on the servicing infrastructure for water and wastewater and what was needed for growth. We want to integrate those renewal and replacement needs, look at the planned upgrades to plan for effectively servicing existing users as well as the potential growth. Again, long-term servicing strategy is the 4th bullet down there. The 5th bullet is looking at flexibility, economic efficiency. So how are we paying for these upgrades, whether it's rates or development charges funded, and then looking at the long-term financial planning. So really the key here for the water and wastewater master plan, and really is in the objectives is long-term responsible planning of the water and wastewater system. Go to the next slide, please. Our main deliverables. So firstly, we conducted a system design criteria and hydraulic performance criteria review. So looking at the existing system, how is your system performing today on the water and wastewater side? Where are some of the pain points? Where can we gain some efficiencies? An inventory, so baseline inventory of the existing water and wastewater system. So where are we in terms of capacity, condition, performance, how well, how full of our pipes, how is our pressure throughout the system? Looking at improving the analysis tools So the hydraulic models that we are using to assess these, so the water, wastewater models and tools that we are using, how effective are they? Do they need to be improved? Then a clear and long-term vision for maintenance expansion. So where do we see this, the system going out to 10, 20, 30 years? Looking at operational and maintenance performance and recommendations. Evaluating short and long-term upgrade needs. So looking at what options do we have in front of us for the short term, so immediate or long-term needs. And then the capital program and financial costs. Next slide. Another slide that how the master plan itself at the top. It's odd. Is that showing up as blank for everyone? Oh, that's weird.
We have it on our
Oh.
screens, but for whatever reason, it's not showing on there.
I apologize for that. That's a strange little nuance with the PDF. So, so really the slide really is looking at the recommendations of the master plan and, you know, how is it interrelated to the capital program recommendations in the green? So if you see on the green, the strategy and system capacity in the dark blue and the analysis tools in the light blue. So the master plan really does utilize and filter down to all these three different items and then sub items down below. So development charges, utility rates, the project list. It does have an impact or an interrelationship with the official plan and the land use analysis, how you operate and maintain your systems, and the bottom two blue boxes there, and then the analysis tools. So how are we looking at development capacity in the light blue? So when you upgrade a pipe and you have development come online, how does that development impact existing infrastructure? How can you use your tools to continue to update where you have capacity or not? Additionally, we like to in the bottom middle light blue, the infrastructure design support. So these recommendations always end up going into a recommendation for design. So we like to be able to support that with our tools as well. And then the drinking water quality management system, as mentioned earlier. Go to our next slide as well. So continuing to set the stage here that with the Class EA process. So our master plan followed phases 1 and 2 of the MEA Class EA process. And what we're showing on the slide here is an excerpt of that Class EA process where we start following from developing and establishing the problem and opportunity statement. So we have a growth plan, we have needs within the systems, and we develop what is the problem, what's the opportunity for us to achieve. So what do we need? We need to develop the servicing strategy and plan for growth. Second is identifying alternative solutions. So what options do we have in front of us for upgrades within the water and wastewater systems? Followed by evaluating in the green box, evaluating these alternative solutions and developing the evaluation criteria. So whether it's technical, financial, environmental, social, cultural, how are we deciding what is the preferred strategy? And then selecting of the preferred solution. So building upon the previous steps, what's the best option for us and why? How do we move forward with that best option with an implementation plan? So our master plan followed this process throughout, including of a public information center, which was held in drawing a blank now, in this past year, April 2024. Go to our next slide. Again, it looks like some of the text may be missing from the balls there. I apologize for that. In our slide, it's showing up on my slide in front of me, so I apologize for that. But really, what the slide's meant to show is really how the inputs that go into the master plan and what the outputs end up being. So we've touched on that a little bit, so I won't belabor that. But really, we're looking at the existing system inventory, some of the criteria and performance objectives of the system, historical designs and studies, EAs, which are a key piece of our recommendations. So looking at what decisions were made historically in terms of the previous master plans, the previous EAs, what their recommendations were made, where are they today, and how can we extend and continue that work that was done previously into our master plan now. And at the very bottom, we're looking at the strategy itself, the upgrade needs and how that fits it, and then the capital program. Our last intro or second to last intro slide or introductory background slide is our criteria and scoring. So I won't read everything through here, but really what this is intended to show is that we have a multiple bottom line scoring criteria for our strategies where we look at environmental factors, whether there is impact or mitigation required for environmental needs, species at risk, climate change impacts. How are our strategies comparing to one another from environmental factors, financial viability, so looking at upfront capital cost, life cycle cost, O&M, technical factors, so meeting the needs of the growth or of the existing system. How is it phased? How is our strategies going to be phased over time? How does it meet O&M challenges? And then social and cultural factors, so protecting quality of life, impact to residents and businesses during construction, archaeocultural heritage features. So all of these factors really are weighed up in terms of our overall evaluation of alternatives. And our overall schedule on the next slide is showing our notice of commencement in October 2023, our PIC April 2024, council today 2024, and then followed by our documentation and public review period. It's a 30-day public review period for review and comment to the public. Moving on, planning for growth. So we have a couple slides on growth here. We've established what we are setting out to do in terms of the master plan, what our deliverables are, what's driving it. And really one of the main drivers, as I mentioned, is growth, and then growth-driven needs of the system. On the right-hand side is our assumptions for the location, the amount of area of growth, proposed number of units, and potential population associated with those units that our water and wastewater plan is set to service. So typically at a master plan level, we start out with the planning boundaries, the planning forecasts, looking at our existing system and how can an extension of that system service those growth needs. Really, that is the fundamental driver for our capital program and our infrastructure plan. We do understand that any level of growth projections comes with a level of uncertainty, both in location and quantity and pace of growth. There can be, year to year changes in demands about where growth needs want to be, depending on several outside influences. But our responsibility to plan for water and wastewater is to look at, what does this plan, where is the growth plan heading into the future, 10, 20, 30, 40 years out into the future, and how can we plan for relatively costly infrastructure underground to make sure that we are not undersizing, or we are making sure we're capturing the needs of that growth, whether it comes in 10 years or 20 or 5. So the first bullet there, the first box there, talking about a little bit about uncertainty, but we want to make sure we're keeping our eye on the long-term plan. In the middle box, we talk about where our planning numbers come from, where they're derived. It is generally provided to us through the South Huron planning group, or through the county planning group, through either draft plans and concept plans where we have detailed plans of subdivision or information. We use that information. Where there is remaining development lands and blocks, we have an assumed number of development units or density. So 40 people per hectare in general, and 2.3 people per unit is a general assumption for some of the remaining lands where there's no better information available. So we want to emphasize we do emphasize our water and wastewater plan for long-term based on build-out potential. So where can these sewers service? Where can these water mains service? And if we are putting it in, we'd like to put it in once and not come back again another time to upgrade any infrastructure. So we want to have clarity and ensure we understand what this infrastructure is for in terms of long-term needs. Where is that boundary? What's that number of growth? And that'll help us ensure we have flexibility to respond if necessary. So also helping guide us and manage that growth in a responsible way. Our next slide is showing a bit of a map, or I'll show 4 maps, I apologize, showing where our locations of growth are occurring. The red is generally showing potential residential growth that was planned for our water and wastewater master plan. Blue, I believe, is industrial, and the lighter green is draft plan of subdivision. So we can see in general the boundaries that we're trying to service. They are extensions to infrastructure for the most part, outwardly away from the core of the system, the existing systems. So we're looking at existing system itself. How does that growth impact anything existing, and then what pipes do we need? What infrastructure do we need to extend to meet that? Generally, the red is the growth areas. I'll pass it off to Alyssa now. We're talked about the growth. We're going to pass it off to talk on the water system. So we're going to go through the wastewater system existing, as well as the capital program itself, and then back to me to talk wastewater. turn my mic off here.
So I'll first talk about a little bit what the existing water system is, what it consists of. So your water system is supplied by Lake Huron from the Lake Huron Primary Water Supply System, or the LHPWSS. So that kind of delivers water at a number of locations, kind of throughout your system. So within your system, you have 8 different pressure zones based off of basically elevation. So as you get to higher elevation, you'll need a new pressure zone, and basically they're delineated by closed pipes, closed valves, pressure reducing valves to allow flow kind of between the pressure zones. So within those pressure zones, you have a bunch of storage, or I guess water facilities. So for storage, you have 2 elevated tanks or water towers. You have the Huron Park elevated tank kind of in the Huron Park area, and then the Exeter elevated tank kind of like in Exeter, as well as a reservoir at the McNaughton Reservoir, which is also operated by the municipality, or South Huron, I guess. And then there's a secondary reservoir on Airport Line in Huron Street, which is operated by the LHPWSS. So kind of that's operated by Aqua. And then in terms of pumping, so there's 2 booster pumping stations. There's one in Crediton, and then again, one in McNaughton, which is in Exeter. So you can kind of see on the bottom right kind of what our existing water demands are. And then looking with growth, so we're looking to add kind of like doubling what water demands we're looking for in the future under full build out of the greater South Huron system. So moving to the next slide, which is this one. Oh, too many. This one. This is kind of just an overview of opportunities and constraints. So kind of your opportunities in terms of storage, especially in Exeter. The current Exeter elevated tank is kind of getting old. It's currently going through like a number of repairs, but in the future, there's opportunity to combine kind of like the 2 Exeter pressure zones into one, and then have a newer, a larger elevated tank, which would simplify operations. Kind of the second thing for storage is at I mentioned the airport reservoir that's operated by the LHPWSS. So there's opportunity there to increase storage, so that in the event that there is like a shutdown scenario, that the water is still being able to provide it to like the greater Exeter area. In terms of pumping, there's opportunity to enhance pumping at the Crediton booster pumping station, and again at the McNaughton booster pumping station, just to have better operations of those facilities. In terms of water transmission, some of like within your existing system, like a number of the water mains are aging, and they're older, they're cast iron, they're kind of having some like fire flow deficiencies just because they're so old. So doing that kind of state of good repair replacement will enhance like capacity and like overall transmission and security of supply to like not just like the local area, but kind of like your overall system. And then I guess in terms of pressures, I kind of mentioned that before, but there's opportunity to kind of do some pressure zone realignments just to kind of optimize pressures in areas so that you're not experiencing too low or too high pressures kind of in those specifically flagged areas. Specifically, I think kind of in the south of Exeter. And then kind of another thing, the final thing I guess to note is more in the Grand Bend area. It's been kind of noted through the study that there's large water losses kind of like in that area. So there's opportunity to do additional studies later to kind of figure out where those water losses are happening so that you can zone in on them and do those repairs. So that's an overview of kind of like the opportunities. So I'm gonna move now into, I believe, the kind of the capital program that addresses these issues. And I'm not gonna read this list because I'm gonna go through the maps right afterwards, but this is kind of an overview of your capital program needs, and you can kind of see the dollar amount kind of in the bottom left, bottom right. And that includes, it doesn't just include like upgrades to address growth, but it's also looking at like state of good repair. So as you're just replacing those water mains, and then like the growth related projects and like the growth related facility upgrades. So that's kind of the total number at the end. So if we go to the next slide, I'll kind of walk through what the program says about Exeter. So kind of I guess the long-term strategy is looking at kind of like growth. So as I kind of mentioned before, doing the merging of the two pressure zones in Exeter will kind of optimize and building a new elevated tank in Exeter, kind of optimize the system and how it's operating. So I know that right now there are upgrades to the existing Exeter elevated tank, but kind of as growth occurs, as you have more and more water demands, there will be a need for something new, something bigger that'll kind of help how the system works. So once that's I guess built, then the existing one would be decommissioned, and through that you'll need to do some upgrades to the McNaughton booster pumping station to kind of optimize how it's running. And then I guess the last two things are kind of do a SCADA master plan. Is just a study to make sure that the SCADA works as like basically how you're watching your system are up to kind of like where you want them to be, and then doing a water meter replacement program just to like replace your water meters. So that's Exeter. So the big, like I mentioned, the big ones, and then for kind of the greater Stephen area, there are a couple of water main replacements, big water main replacements. Those are because they're aging infrastructure, so it's to enhance like security of supply. So if one of those breaks, then like there's like potential for like long construction times to fix. So having that replacement system is good just for general capacity. So my next one. No, the previous slide. Yes, and then there's sorry, I cannot read that. No, the previous slide, sorry. My eyes are not that good. Sorry. Oh, yes, the water meter replacement program, sorry. So doing that again, just for the greater South Huron area. And then we talked about kind of before the water loss program. So developing that, so putting in like key water meters basically to kind of figure out what the area of water losses would be. So you can do those replacements and do those like further leak detection studies. And then there's a connection to the like the greater the Lake Huron water system. There's a connection that can be abandoned just because it's currently not in use, so it can be just abandoned. And then kind of the last one on the last side is in the Crediton booster pumping station to do some works with the valving just to allow backfeeding, which again, like enhances security of supply to like between the pressure zones. And then there's another connection to be abandoned just because, again, it's not currently being used. So I will pass it back to Mark to talk about wastewater.
Let's take the laptop back. My mic on here, our existing wastewater system. So similarly, as to water side, our first step is looking at what do we have? What's our existing system look like? In wastewater, we are generally divided into two separate systems. Exeter, delineated by the Exeter wastewater treatment facility, along with 4 sanitary pumping stations or wastewater pump stations that service the area. So small network of gravity sewers, the treatment plant into the sort of northwest, and then 4 pumping stations extending to the south. The Grand Bend, it's the Grand Bend wastewater treatment facility with the 3 municipal pumping stations and the series of gravity sewers associated with it. So really simple, just the background there for the existing system. And then similarly, when we start our master plan, we usually establish our existing opportunities. So where do we have capacity? Where are our constraints, or where are we seeing that there are current issues? Along with an opportunity, generally along with opportunities, is that we're looking at all of the historical information that was done to date. So historical master plans, EA, recent construction projects, and recent decisions that were made in order to service the both existing and growth. Where are they fitting into this picture? And then we can start from there. So we do have a lot of the bullets on here, so I'll go through them relatively quickly, but really they do set the stage for how we layer on growth. So this is done similarly with the water side first. We see where we're at, layer on growth, and then we can see where our new program is. So starting over in Grand Bend at the top left corner, looking at the Oakwood Ave pump station decommissioning. So an opportunity there is the potential that with the 21 sewer coming in, we have an opportunity to decommission an existing facility. The 21 trunk sewer extension, from a historical recommendation, is one of our current opportunities on the table in front of us, as well as decommissioning a Grand Cove Estates pumping station, which also frees up some trunk sewer capacity. The 4th bullet on the left side in the Grand Bend side is the municipality potentially taking ownership of Dark Horse Pumping Station in the future that can support development. So these are all potentials. These are all things we look at and establish at the outset prior to really diving into the modeling and then making, recommendations. In the top right corner over in Exeter, looking at opportunities for optimization of a corridor construction. So if there's water main or sewer replacements that can benefit and go in conjunction with road reconstruction works, that's one of our first opportunities. At the Exeter treatment facility, upgrades that can proceed from previous recommendations. The Snyder sewage pumping station, there's some complications where there is some sewer alignments, pump station upgrades, and development in the southwest corner, looking at optimizing that area in the southwest of Exeter as an opportunity for future growth to meet some growth needs. And then looking at the Huron Park and Crediton pumping stations and optimizing how they are operated. So the Crediton pumping station, looking at options for a separate force main, separate dedicated force main, similarly with Huron Park, potentially for a new force main or building in storage to optimize those 2 stations and how they work together. And then lastly, at the very bottom, looking at potentially replacing or abandoning sewers in Huron Park in the easements. There are several sewers cutting through easements where there's an opportunity to abandon those and improve the scenario of the system as the area develops. So this is sort of setting the baseline, looking at historical, looking what's going on today prior to layering on growth and trying to solve future growth problems. And our next slide, similar to how Alyssa went through, we do have the bulleted list of all of the capital program pieces, but we can save those. I can describe those in the maps. And then similar side is the total project cost, bottom right corner of 118 million. And as a reminder, again, this is all of the projects, state of good repair, current existing issues, future growth, everything all in one, not split out just yet. So that's a subsequent step to split that out to determine what that cost split would be that is associated to existing and solving existing issues or existing condition capacity issues versus dedicated growth costs. That's for the DC study. Okay, so going through Exeter, so starting in the top left where the treatment facility is, so recommending in the several bullets is upgrades to the treatment facility to service growth, so short and long-term upgrades to continue operation, to meet current needs, to meet growth at the Exeter plant. In the top right bullet is an Exeter I&I program. So generally that we have actually later on in the presentation, we have a dedicated inflow and infiltration slide. So that's common to many municipalities, is to have an I&I, inflow infiltration reduction program, to get the rainwater out of your pipes. So you're not, conveying it, pumping it, treating it. A proactive program is generally a common theme across all Southern Ontario municipalities, at least what we're seeing, to manage wet weather issues, any capacity or wet weather flow management issues. As I mentioned in the opportunities and constraints slide, the Snyder pumping station will follow with a new construction of a South Exeter pumping station, and then a Snyder pumping station decommissioning once the new station is built, and then a former John Street pumping station that can be removed. So really the main in addition, sorry, I'll just wait on that slide for a sec. I'd like to describe the lines on the map here. We've got purple line, which is a replace sewer. So you can see in the downtown core, sort of the running north-south and east to west, there are several replacement sewers on the plan. Some in conjunction with roadworks, some are purely for age and condition purposes. A lot of that state of good repair work is as discussed and as worked through with South Huron team. The green is a new sewer, so all the green pipes, the green lines on the map there, are new proposed sewers, whether it be for interconnection or new growth or simply pure efficiency purposes. Their green sewers are all brand new sewers. The light blue is an upsizing of a sewer. So where you have an existing sewer on an existing right of way, we're putting a blue line there that is an upsize. So we're going to need to replace it with a larger size. And then black is the decommissioning. So if there's a parallel pipe that is being built opportunistically, then the black ones are probably not needed. I believe those are the ones in behind the main road, going through the alleys, cutting through parking lots. So those blacks, once the purple and the green can be in place, you can resurface. We can decommission those black sewers that are listed there. Okay, just to give you the context there. So moving to Grand Bend. So starting in the top left, the Grand Bend septic system reinspection program is a line item on our capital program list. It's a legacy project that's carried forward. The property owner decommissioning Grand Cove Estates Oakwood Inn sewage pumping station connecting to the Highway 21 gravity sewer is in the left side, and then working counterclockwise. Sorry, pump and mechanical upgrades at the Grand Bend PS2 to accommodate growth. At the bottom of the page, the Grand Bend treatment facility capacity upgrades to accommodate the proposed growth in front of us. Pump and mechanical upgrades at the POG pump station, and then potential of the Dark Horse Winery private pumping station transition to municipality to enable further growth within that area. And then the Oakwood pump station decommissioning and connection to the 21 gravity sewer once it's constructed. An important note on this map here is the degree of the red and the length of the sewer shown is based on the full build out area. Again, and that is the sewer extending as the red progresses as well. So if there are changes to where the boundary lies upon completion of the official plan, that sewer only extends to where that boundary is required. So the sewer is further is building upon the previous EA that was completed, the previous construction that is planned, and extending to how much of this red area is required for growth. Okay, and our last map is Huron Park Centralia Crediton. So top left again, pumping and mechanical upgrades at the Crediton pumping station. So a small pocket of growth in the red there at the southeast corner there of Crediton. Requiring upgrades for the Crediton pump station and subsequent upgrades to the force main And now we know that the Crediton and the Huron Park force mains are working in tandem, and an upgrade would need to be coordinated between the two, depending on definitively what happens at one. We would need to account for that at the other station. And at Huron Park, looking at pump stations for potential for upgrades and installation of some wet weather storage there to manage some of the peak flows. The twinning of the force main for future growth is a potential upgrade. We understand that it is a long distance between Huron Park, getting all the way up to Exeter. So that is a key project upgrade that would have a pretty significant impact. Again, in Huron Park, an I&I program, common to the slides, is an I&I program to manage wet weather. And then a condition assessment of the E1 pump station required and repair, replace as needed. So looking at a little bit more detail to that pump station. And our next slide, we do talk about I&I and wet weather management. Specifically in Exeter, we've got our Exeter map divided. So the big red circle divided really into two areas. Yellow is the some key sewer replacements. So if you recall, our Exeter map had several upgrades and sewer replacements within that service area. And a lot of that what that will achieve is reduction of I&I and added infiltration flow into the system due to rain, and should reduce the overall flow and impact to the pump stations under peak rain events and plants under peak rain events. And in general, an overall I&I reduction in the red areas in the south. So looking at a sort of a proactive I&I reduction wet weather management program, looking at addressing some of those risks is a key element and part of a master plan. And we're seeing this in many other municipalities, is that proactive flow monitoring, proactive I&I reduction can help out and reduce flows in a lot of these problem areas. I think that takes us to the end of our presentation. That takes us to the end of our slides. We're opening it up to questions and comments, concerns.
Great presentation. Thank you to both of you. Are there any questions from members of the committee of the whole? Councillor Vaughn.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
So in awful lot of information here to read.
Yes.
And looking at what we're looking at with a high level at home, it makes me anyway ask even more questions in terms of when I'm looking at some of these tables. There's a number of different tables, page 12, page 16, page 18, that mention different figures and numbers and so on and so forth. But there's no footnotes to any of those numbers. So I don't really know where those numbers are coming from and what they're supposed to actually mean to me.
Okay.
Type of thing. So I do see some pretty significant numbers in the multi-millions. You know, the 163,000 was one table. I think there was another 120 million as another table. You were saying that that's combines a whole bunch of things, kind of operations, growth, opportunities for improvement. I forget, you had three main categories, but because I don't have it written down in this. So I actually asked our CIO today if it was possible to actually see the study, wondering if that might give me more answers to some of the kinds of questions that I have. The actual study, it's interesting because we have two things happening here tonight. We have an official plan draft being presented, and then we have this water and wastewater being presented. And in some areas, notably in Crediton and in the sort of Lakeshore Grand Bend area, the maps and the growth and settlement, they don't match each other. Yeah, so that's kind of problematic. I don't really understand why they don't match one another at this point. I don't know if you're looking for more feedback, if this is a timing issue in terms of which should come first, the chicken or the egg? So should we make some statements in terms of where do we want to see the settlement from a council perspective, areas to be, and then the water and wastewater study maps should reflect that. I don't understand why we have different maps for different purposes, especially since they're both long-term, long-range planning kinds of documents, like 20, 30 years, maybe even more. Yeah, so when I look at all these, sure, there's lots of things to do. There's always lots of things to do. But I don't see what the costs of doing these things are for like per project kind of thing. What the priorities are or the proposed timing, because they're all different types of projects. Some are kind of maintenance. I don't know if some are nice to have. I don't know what the cost benefits of the rainwater, I forget what you call that, I&I kind of study. So maybe that's a good best practice, but what does it actually cost and why is that a problem for us? Like it might be something people do, but money is not endless. Okay, and so to sort of get a sense of where we're at as a municipality, I just would like to have information that would kind of tell me where are our real priority areas. This just basically gives me too much information and it's not narrowed down. That's sort of my initial
Do
comment.
you want to respond to that, Mark, at all? Or? Mark, just a clarification too, if I may ask, the official plan is different than this plan that you're talking about. If I understand this correctly, this plan is about infrastructure that's good for potentially 100 years or more, correct?
Correct.
Whereas the official plan is a 20 to 30-year document, which can change. There's no real cost to that, as opposed to, like you said earlier about infrastructure rather than doing it twice. Is that basically right?
That's, yes, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. And a good example is some of the sewers that we would recommend as part of this plan, looking at what we'd consider a full build out. And that full build out can in many cases in many municipalities consist of a boundary that is beyond what an official plan boundary could be. Now, that's not to say that that pipe would be built all the way beyond a boundary, knowing full well that the official plan stops here. So the pipe stops where the boundary stops in general, but sizing for that pipe considers long-term. So I can address a few of the questions here. Can you see the study? The master plan study will include a lot of the information that you're looking at. So cost per project, timing, prioritization, and what comes first, what's the most priority, and essentially like a stage prioritization of what's the most important. So that is part of the water and wastewater master plan study, line by line, project by project cost. So we can see what, if there is a project we don't feel is as critical as the next, we can face it and see where the cash flow comes from. Because that at the end of the day is a lot of where this, there's a big number on the screen, but if it's for 30 years, how do we cash flow that out? And how is that budgeted for? And why the maps are different is that, yes, this is a long-term infrastructure planning strategy that does include boundaries beyond what the official plan will be. And then if the official plan comes up and has a new shape of a boundary, we can revisit, and at any point can revisit where those sewer water mains, where those extents truly land, whether or not we need to pull any of them back or shorten them or, remove a project altogether if it's outside of the boundary altogether. I got most of them. Did I address some of them?
I think you got most of them.
Thanks.
Another thought which ran through my mind as I was reading this was, and I talked a bit about the lakeshore, and I do realize that part of that whole picture on the map is maybe looking at 100 years. But then when I look at Crediton, I don't see even all of the settlement area that we have designated in former official plans being included. So I see less there on the water, wastewater, and I don't quite understand why they're being treated differently. But what that sort of had me thinking was, in the study itself, is there anything about, rather than how we spend money for improvements and upgrades and more pipes in the ground, is there anything about how we best maximize what it is we already have? So are there pipes and underutilized that should inform us in some way about where we should be putting growth to match the infrastructure we've already paid for? Is that in the study? Because I don't see it here.
Sure. To the first question about Crediton, I'd have to take that back. I'm not sure why we'd have a map that's not showing what that full build out could be. I'm not positive, so we'll have to take that and take a look.
Mr. Giverson, do you want us to respond to that? You can use the microphone. Thanks.
Through you, Mayor Finch. This is an evolving process with the OP, as the OP changes and evolves into a conclusion, and the master plan as well. So the intent is to align, but they don't always align. So the specific property in Crediton has been a subject of discussion, and the presentation following us will have further clarity. Is it in or is it out? So at this juncture with the water wastewater master plan, the property was out, but I suspect there will be I'm not going to steal the planner's thunder, but they will have or will be presenting something of a compromise from what was previously presented with the OP. So the previous draft OP update had the property out. My understanding of the presentation after ours is part of that property will come in, so we will adjust accordingly. So it's an evolving process, and the intent is to align. Most of the questions that are being asked, the answers are in the master plan itself. The intent of tonight is to give you a very high level. It's an introduction to the master plan, is to get that overview of the larger projects, the specific detail of wanting to know where a specific number came from, a growth number, a specific property, the priorities, the list. That's all in the master plan. So after tonight, we will take all the comments away. The master plan will be finalized, and then it will be presented to council. So you will, when the full plan is presented, you will see all the details with all the references on where the cost came from, where the project came from, the growth numbers. Hopefully the planners will get caught up with the master plan, and will the growth, that the areas that are identified for growth will align. But please keep in mind, it's an evolving process. And as the OP evolves, then so does the master plan, and but the intent is to have it coordinated.
Great, thank you very much. And if the questions are answered in the report, I don't think staff have to read the report for us. We're supposed to be doing that ahead of time. And so I appreciate that. So if the answers are already in the report, I think the staff's response is it's in the report, so we can move forward quickly. Councillor Oak, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So just to clarify, we don't have the report. So that was a question I had, is this a, this is unusual to have a consultant give a high level before the actual study is given at the same time, right? And I know we're doing both at the same time. So that's good news that this isn't a final version, because there are some things in the OP that will change the master, the water plan here. I believe will likely there'll be some changes that are coming. The one question I had was, again, and it'll come with the study, but page 10 of the chart, the table there shows Grand Bend expanding quicker than Exeter. Now, is that all of Grand Bend or is that just the South Huron portion? That is in that, and I know it's 100-year projection. The same to Councillor Vaughn's question. You know, if we're including Grand Bend expansion and residential along 21 in 100-year projection, that isn't it. We probably should have Crediton in there for 100-year projection as well, for that other land. You know, even if it doesn't happen in this iteration of the official plan. So, you know, we're thinking 100 years here. But just wondering how, whether this is South Huron's portion of Grand Bend going to 6,600 people and Exeter 6,100. That's news to me, I guess, that area would be growing quicker than our main urban center. So,
Mr. Garberson, go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Finch. Yeah, that really stands out, and that growth number is to reflect that entire area being developed. So at the time the master plan was being reviewed, there was a sewer design that had that kind of projected growth. But we know now, and we'll know more after today, that that growth projection for the next 20 to 30 years in the next draft of the OP is considerably less. So it will be amended to reflect the OP. That is, the intent is that it will align with the OP. We wanted to make sure that council was aware of that the planning for water and wastewater is long-term for the life of the infrastructure, which is a different process than official plan or growth projections. So the official plan will look at 20 to 30 years. Pipes in the ground, good planning, good engineering is that those are designed for 100 years. So it depends on the type of infrastructure we're talking about, but pipes in the ground are to be designed as good engineering practice, good financial planning for the municipality to look at those kind of projections. But the growth is a different matter. So in a shorter answer to your question is that will be amended based on the next update we get or we receive from the on the OP update.
Councillor Oak.
thank you. That's good. Another question I had was on the elevated tower in northeast Exeter that is proposed long term. I guess when is that expected to happen? And in light that we're spending probably close to $1 million upgrading our current tower right now, is that something that's going to happen in the next 10, 15, 20 years? What is the expectation in that scenario?
Go ahead.
So that's more of a long-term strategy for the overall Exeter systems. We're looking at like 20, 25 years, like recognizing that you are doing a lot of work on it right now, but that's kind of just to get you over the next hump until your water tower becomes too small to service kind of the area that you have.
Thank you, Councillor Oak.
And just to follow, so if with the OP, there's we're looking at potentially some land to the east of Exeter on the outskirts of Exeter, would our existing system cover that land without having to loop it back around down Morrison Line that's being proposed? Is there enough water capacity down that line for that? That's why I was asking whether if there is a proposal for additional land to the east out Huron Street and Sanders Street there, whether there's enough water capacity with our elevated tower.
Mr. Garberson.
Through you, Mayor Finch. First, I want to say our two engineers from GEI have really been thrown into the fire here. Mark is literally at the very end of the process. Julian Bell was the engineer, did all the background, all this work. Alyssa, number one, I guess, or Alyssa two, has also been thrown in at the tail end of the project. So normally I would not even sit in on a presentation like this. The consultant would present their own work. But the staff that worked on the project are just not available now, or no longer with the firm. So in answer to your specific question, that land is proposed in the OP to expand to the east. Yes, it can be serviced with our existing infrastructure. It literally is right on the edge of what is capable, or what the Exeter water system is capable of delivering. So the new water tower, elevated tank, somewhere in the north east of Exeter, is a long-term strategy well beyond that small piece that's planned for this 20 to 30 years of growth in the OP update. So that new tower is on that horizon, kind of beyond what the OP is being proposed. But it has been reviewed for, can it be accommodated within the existing infrastructure? And the answer is yes.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Oak.
Thank you. Thank you. That explains that. The page 22 talks about decommissioning the Grand Cove Estate and Oakwood Inn sewage pumping stations. What timeline are we looking at if that were to happen again? And you know, or how much life do we have left in those pumping stations, I guess?
Mr. Garrison.
Yeah, so the both of those are private pumping stations. The Oakwood Inn and Resort pumping station is virtually on its last legs. And I quite often almost get begged by Oakwood Inn and Resort to do something to help them in some way. They have no intentions of replacing that pumping station. So their current plans is to connect to the trunk sewer. So as soon as that's available, and there's a few things in the works, but they hired an engineer, they designed a connection. I have a copy of the plans. It was provided to the GEI consultants on how they wish to connect. It's a matter of Oakwood Inn making the decision to move forward, but their pumping station literally is it's on its last legs. The Grand Cove Estates pumping station did have some upgrades, emergency upgrades, just a few years ago to get them through a few years. But that pumping station dates from the 70s and is not in very good shape. It's not very reliable. So there's been discussions for quite a few years now, including in the previous master plan, that when the trunk sewer was extended, it would open up that opportunity that they could decommission their pump station and connect to the trunk sewer. So there's a few kind of issues swirling around kind of both of those, but those both of those private pumping stations are old, and the Oakwood Inn one in particularly poor condition. So I would say it's imminent that they want to connect.
Thank you for that. Mr. Garrison and our two consultants here tonight. And it's just a common sense approach, would it not be, to remove pumping stations where possible to get all gravity flow and into one system? Does that make sense, Mark?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, absolutely. They're especially facilities that are 10, 20, 30 years old. That's common practice, and municipalities are doing that everywhere, that they really try to emphasize a gravity solution over pumped.
Thank you. And the benefit of that would be less cost to the actual users. Is that fair?
Less O&M costs for sure. Yeah, you're not replacing pumps and having operators go out to check things. No, less risk of overflow. So there's a risk component as well, where if a pump were to fail, if a force main were to fail, they're then there's less risk for overflow to the environment, or if there is no emergency overflow to a natural feature, there will be no backups to local sewers. So yeah, many positives to connecting sewage pumping stations into gravity sewers than decommissioning the pump stations.
Thank you. And again, it would be a financial benefit to the users, especially in this situation like Grand Cove and Oakwood in itself, correct?
Yes, long term, yes.
Okay, thank you. It'd be more visionary is what I guess I'm saying. Thank you. Councilor, you had something?
Yeah, just one last question. The page 15, there's a residential up in the northwest corner of Exeter there that's on the map. The northwest, and just wondered where that came from, and because there had been talk about potential commercial property or industrial property there too. So just wondering where that how that became red on the map, I guess.
Mr. Harrison?
Through you, Mayor Finch. So we indicated that as development land. We are not the planners, although I've been accused of that many times. But through the planning process, through the OP, will designate whether that's employment lands or residential land. So we did put it on in the master plan as read as residential. And I'll preempt a question. There's a parcel of land in Centralia that we indicated as employment land, which again, that's up to the planning staff on whether it ends up as blue or red. And we will coordinate once the planning moves along. So there's no intention from the master plan to designate land or indicate what it is. The intent was to include it so that it was planned for, but we're not determining whether it's residential or employment land. That is not our mandate. That's not what the master plan is about. So once the OP gets further along and they define something as its employment lands and it should be blue, it'll be updated on the master plan, or the other way around. That piece of land south of Centralia that's on the map is blue. If it's to be red, it'll be changed accordingly. But we are not the planners, and we know no intention to do that.
Councilor Oak?
Thank you. And thank you for that, because CBD lands are similar on the map as well. We're not sure what that will be. But so the idea will be this master plan will be finalized after we endorse the official plan, which is going to be endorsed first here.
Go ahead, Mr. Garrison.
Through you, Mayor Finch. I guess it's my desire that the water wastewater master plan is endorsed. And when it's finalized, we will take the most up-to-date information from the planners and include it before it's finalized. But I would stress again, those designations, that is not up to the water wastewater master plan to designate the use of any property. We just use the most up-to-date information that's available.
Thank you. And again, I guess it's contiguous. Any properties that contiguous to a development is where you'd want to develop any, again, is that correct? That would be where you put your infrastructure money.
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch, that is correct. You'll notice in other places on the map, Exeter south west, for example, it shows it all in red, but there's a highway commercial along London Road, the same as the other side. So it's to demonstrate that that's a growth area. We could have chosen any color, but so it doesn't match perfectly, but the intent is to align with the planning.
Thank you. Any other questions? Deputy, go ahead.
Thank you. The abandonment of the North Middlesex water line, how does that benefit us and our customers cost-wise?
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. So those are The abandonments from the North Middlesex system, those lines actually are South Huron water mains. So anything that's, and this is an old agreement that goes back to Stephen Township and McGilvery Township. So pre-amalgamation, there was an agreement. It was updated in 2004 with South Huron and North Middlesex. But there were a number of water mains along Mount Carmel Drive, so along the south municipal boundary, that were built by McGilvery and extended north into Stephen Township. Most concessions, water mains extended through, and they were fed from the McGilvery system. Over time, the Stephen system expanded and was able to feed those water mains. So all but one location, we have water mains that now in South Huron that can feed all of those. So the idea is those former North Middlesex water lines, they're old, they are well past their useful life, and we have to replace them because they have been turned over. The ownership was turned over to us about 30, 40 years ago now. So it allows the disconnecting from North Middlesex allows us to stand on our own and then have our own water mains.
Follow up?
So those water mains now are not being used.
Go ahead, Don.
The water mains that we're talking about, one is on Eagleson Line, and yes, it is being used. There are customers on Eagleson Line, and it's fed off the North Middlesex system. So there's a meter chamber at Greenway Road, and then the pipe that extends up Eagleson Line was transferred from McGilvery to Stephen Township back in the 70s. And now that water main, so it is being utilized, still in service, and we have a long-term plan to how to feed that and disconnect from the North Middlesex system. There's no long-term benefit to continue to be fed from the North Middlesex system. So the disconnects are disconnecting from their water source feed into our municipality and ensuring that we can feed from our municipality, all of those sections. There's another one on Bullock Line in Village of Greenway, which already can be fed off Grand Bend Line. We have a water main that runs down Grand Bend Line. And then there's a short section going down Bullock Line into the Village of Greenway. And once there's upgrades made on Grand Bend Line, then that can also be cut off from North Middlesex system. They don't want the connections, and we don't want the interconnects between the two municipalities unless they serve if there's some benefit to doing it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Nothing. Thank you very much for your presentation. Well done. And Ms. Sula Carlson, we need a recommendation.
The South Huron Committee of the Whole receives a presentation of Alyssa Kuchansky and Mark Zamochik of GEI Consultants Limited regarding the Water Wastewater Master Plan for information.
And a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Oaks, seconded by Deputy Mayor. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Carries with 5. Thank you. And moving on to our next topic, we've got our official plan. Welcome Denise and Selena. And whenever you're ready, take your time.
Thank you. I'll just get set up here and we'll get going. Sorry, Alex, I just need to reconnect to the, perfect, thank you. Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Finch and members of the Committee of the Whole. Thanks for allowing Denise and I to come chat with you today about the second draft of the revised official plan. So I'll just take an opportunity as we start here to refamiliarize the committee and any folks in attendance with the project timeline to date. So the official plan was initiated by council in February of this year. I should say official plan review. The statutory public meeting under Section 26 of the Planning Act was held in March. After that, a series of community tables were held throughout April, May, and June, just to get some initial feedback from the public on possible amendments to the official plan. Following those community tables, a committee of the whole meeting similar to today was held in June, where we chatted with council at that time about first draft amendments. Then that first draft was received by council in August of this year. Open houses were held after that August meeting to provide the public with an opportunity to ask questions and ask for clarification regarding that first draft, and that took place in August and September. And so today's Committee of the Whole is really just an opportunity to provide council with a second draft update and receive direction, or sorry, I should say the committee with a second draft update and receive direction on any outstanding items. So in terms of remaining project milestones, we are closing in towards potentially the finish line of this project. So following this meeting, staff would be proceeding with looking for direction to proceed with scheduling the mandatory public meeting. What the mandatory public meeting does is it offers members of the public an opportunity to provide verbal comment to council on the proposed official plan changes. And from there, after that public meeting, South Huron Council is in a position to adopt the official plan amendment formally. Following adoption, the amendment does require final approval from Huron County Council. And we remain on track to have the amendment approved and in full force and effect by spring 2025, pending these milestones. So as noted, we did have those public open houses this fall, and we did have a good turnout to those. About half of all attendees came out to our Lakeshore and Stephen open house in late August, with the remainder coming to our Usborne and Exeter open houses in September. We did also have a number of folks who didn't necessarily come out to an open house, but they used the online viewer, which you can see as part of the app presentation to sort of engage, look at potential changes and see what may be affecting their property and just different properties throughout the municipality. Generally, when it comes to speaking with members of the public, the theme of conversation did remain focused on the long-term protection of agriculture. That's definitely been a consistent theme we've heard from residents throughout this entire project process. I did note in the report as well that we did have more generally just an opportunity to chat with folks about recent planning applications and sort of the public's observations on the changing nature of public participation in planning applications. I think definitely residents of South Huron are feeling those changes under those recent pieces of provincial legislation that do change the way that members of the public can engage in terms of specifically their appeal rights on different applications. So not necessarily an official plan related piece of feedback, but definitely worth noting for council that that was observed by residents as we chatted with them. So generally, again, the theme of conversation remained focused on the long-term protection of open house of agriculture. We did receive a number of pieces of written correspondence to date from both agencies and members of the public regarding the first draft with some comments. Those have been summarized for council in table 2 of the staff report, as well as staff's response to these comments. Certainly, if the committee has any specific questions regarding any of that correspondence or staff's response, we're happy to speak to those items further specifically. One piece of correspondence I did want to highlight for the committee's information is confirmation from Three Fires Group on behalf of Chippewa of Kettle and Stony Point First Nation that they were satisfied with our initial consultation. Just for the committee's information, Three Fires Group is a consulting group that, to our understanding, works on behalf of that specific community when it comes to different policy projects such as this. It was certainly a pleasure to consult with that group, and we're hoping that that relationship can be maintained for further planning projects. Just on the screen here is a example of the postcard that we utilize to let the public know about the project and the open houses. This was sort of a first for the planning department, but generally the feedback was that people liked the postcard. I think it stood out a bit more than just a regular piece of mail and kind of contained the essential information that they needed. So generally, I think a successful sort of project in a project.
Thanks, Selena. Turning to policy amendments, so council had an opportunity to read the second draft. You'll note that we've kept the same format of strike through for any deletions and then adding an underline and bold. The bulk of the changes to the second draft are as a result of the release of the new provincial planning statement. So this was released by the provincial government in August, and it does take force and effect on the 20th. Of October. So it's not yet in full force and effect, but there are no further changes coming. This will be the document that we'll be working with on a go forward basis. So there are a number of changes required to South Huron's official plan, as well as the county official plan. So we have outlined all of those starting on page 4. Just in terms of how this works, I guess sort of functionally, I did present to Huron County Council last week to let them know of the need for a county official plan conformity amendment. County Council has given direction for staff to come back with the terms of reference for that work. So that will be happening in 2025. What we seek to do is to bring South Huron's plan also into PPS conformity right at the same time. So no need to wait for the county OPA. We can go ahead and move with South Huron's. I certainly did also make County Council aware of where there need to be changes, for example, to the settlement area descriptions. Greater Grand Bend would be an example of something that would also need to be reflected in the county plan, but that can be done after the 5-year review is approved here. So just at a high level, I thought I might go over some of the changes to the provincial planning statement so that council had a sense of what has changed. So sort of the key changes. So in addition to replacing the provincial policy statement, as it were, it also replaced the Places to Grow Act or the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. As it has merged those two documents, the provincial planning statement now has a lot of concepts and terms and definitions that really are directed and focused on sort of the fastest growing places in Ontario. South Huron is not one of those places, and so we've focused on the changes that would be most relevant at this level. Agriculture, I noticed we actually didn't include the summary for agriculture, but I'll start there. What they've changed specifically, they did not include that 3-lot proposal, which I think the farm groups are happy to see. That certainly was in alignment with the direction from councils in Huron County. They did include requirements for municipalities across Ontario to permit additional residential units in prime agricultural settings. We have in fact already done that here in South Huron, and it's going quite well. I don't know if anyone has noticed on number 4, just north of Exeter here, there is a new detached ARU going up as part of a new accessory building. And that's exactly the type of thing, the flexibility that can be introduced, whether again, it's for multi-generational farming, whether it's for accommodating a loved one or otherwise. So I think it's a really good thing that we've done here, and an example of where I think both in Huron County and South Huron where we've been proactive. And so now we in fact don't have as many changes to make. The approach taken by the province is exactly what we've implemented here in Huron. So generally, there's a new focus on planning for populations and employment growth, really wanting to see the Ministry of Finance numbers being used. And so that's certainly what the Watson Associates study for Huron County and South Huron is based on. So happy to see that. There's a lot of requirements in terms of looking at how we are making land available for growth. So we are required to ensure that there are lands available for at least 20, but not beyond 30 years of growth. And so that's sort of the window we have to work within when we're looking at how much land needs to be designated to accommodate the projected population growth. So when we look at that, not only are we looking at overall population, but we want to think of the makeup of that population Are there a lot of seniors, for example? Are there a lot of people who are perhaps younger trying to get into a housing market? And how does that then correlate to the overall number of units and the types of units that we think are going to be needed over the next 30 years in South Huron? So as we move out to that 2051, I know we've talked about this before, but as we move out closer to 2041 and 2051, we can expect that the predominant housing type going up will be apartments. Right? And that's going to meet that population flux as we see our baby boomer population moving through the life cycle and needing different types of units than what we typically have, which is a lot of single detached. So again, I think the work that we did last year with the housing update for South Huron's official plan has really been well received in terms of the allowing for additional needs housing, for example, all types of residential intensification, redevelopment, and trying to promote the utilization of perhaps some of our spaces that haven't been used as well. When we were consulting for the official plan, we were also consulting on some initial ideas for the community improvement plan. One of the spaces that I think is historically has perhaps been underutilized in many downtowns are the second story spaces above the retail shops, and thinking about, could there potentially be a community improvement plan grant that would help to revitalize those spaces for residential specifically. Again, we're looking at, when we look at densities for new housing, it speaks to that comment that Selena made about a lot of folks in South Huron, you know, they're wary of seeing agricultural lands being changed over into development. And so our discussion with them was that, you know, if and when agricultural lands are ultimately needed for development within a settlement area boundary, what we want to ensure is that we're making the best use of those lands. And so really thinking about minimum density requirements, thinking about utilizing that infrastructure so that, again, it becomes more cost efficient, not only for the developer to put in, but for the municipality and the community to maintain going forward. Right? So really thinking about how can we utilize the assets that we've already invested in. And that's where the water wastewater master plan has really been helpful, as I say, in speaking to the OP process. The two really do go hand in hand. And so yeah, just very appreciative of the timing. It's allowed this OP review to be much more effective and efficient from my perspective. Some of the other changes you're going to note, the official plan, the PPS rather, has taken away the term comprehensive review. So it still means we need to be looking at good planning. So comprehensive reviews would come into place if we wanted to expand a settlement area, if we wanted to make any changes to employment lands. So while we aren't required to do that sort of specific exercise, we're still very much required to look at what is good planning, what is the need, are there alternatives available, how are we going to make best use of existing infrastructure. There's a new component requiring us to look at agricultural impact assessments and really to look at the overall agricultural systems planning. So ag systems planning is a concept that's been used in the Greater Golden Horseshoe in recent years. We were encouraged to use this system previously. We are now required to use it. So you're going to hear the planners use this term, agricultural systems planning. And it took me a couple times to get my head wrapped around exactly what that means for us in Huron. But essentially, there's two components to the ag systems approach. The first is the land. So we look at the Canada land classification. So class 1, class 2, class 3 lands. We're also looking at the way in which that land base is made up. So looking at the level of fragmentation across the land and really thinking about what is that ultimate parcel size that we need to continue agricultural viability moving forward. So the first component is the land. The second component is all of the other elements along the agri-food value chain. So everything from agronomists to an abattoir to a drainage contractor, literally everything that touches agriculture along that value chain. As you can imagine, in Huron, this is quite a lot of data. And so this is something that we're going to have to try to put together and try to make some sense of, and so that we can think about as we make changes, whether that's a settlement area boundary adjustment, how does it affect the agricultural system? And how are we being really mindful of avoiding what could be a negative impact to agriculture over the long term? So again, employment lands, not a lot of changes there. We need to continue to make sure that our employment lands aren't hindered by having any sensitive uses, for example, in proximity. Sewage, water, stormwater, so South Huron's really well set up for this, in that you have brought full services to so many of your smaller villages, and so that does really allow us to not have to worry so much so about septic. So we do still have them in a few areas. Some of the other changes, we have included a land acknowledgement at the beginning and also enhanced the requirement for early and meaningful consultation with our Indigenous nations during planning processes. At the same time, we also need to be very mindful as to the capacity of the nations. So we don't want to overwhelm them with paperwork and requests. We want to be thinking about, again, what does meaningful consultation look like? And certainly for our development community, making it clear that if they are engaging in an archaeological assessment, for example, they will need to do consultation with the nations prior to the initiation of that work. There's also Indigenous interests and certainly knowledge in terms of our natural heritage system, so the natural environment, and that's also a requirement. So that again is a change in the new provincial planning statement, just more of an emphasis, I would say, on early and meaningful consultation. I'm going to go to energy for a minute. So there are a number of changes in the energy section of PPS, and we'll go through them sort of one by one. So generally, the direction that I've included in the South Huron official plan, and again, this is open for discussion this evening, is that commercial scale energy projects, where possible, would be directed outside of prime agricultural areas. So what I'm speaking about there would be something like battery storage. That's not necessarily something that we would like to see on prime ag lands. Now, commercial wind turbines, they need to be in the agricultural area. They're not able to be that close to sensitive receptors, and we actually want them to stay away from our settlement areas to some extent. So wanting to make that differentiation, those that can locate outside of prime ag areas, they need to. Those that cannot, there would be the opportunity for them to locate within the prime ag lands, taking into consideration what would be the negative impact. We would permit ground-mounted solar facilities as an on-farm diversified use or accessory to the primary residential use on an AG4 property. Again, lots of ground-mounted solar throughout South Huron today. That's a good thing. You know, on a small scale, we're not looking to see Class 1 land be used entirely for a solar farm. That would not be good use of Class 1 land. Farm scale energy infrastructure. So of course, anyone who has a non-commercial scale wind turbine, an anaerobic digester, I do know of one going in Usborne, which is pretty exciting. Any of those are absolutely permitted as agricultural related uses, and we have no concern there. We have put in a policy that would state that where there are commercial wind turbines looking to establish, as of August 28th, the province has put out one of the largest energy procurements in, I think, the province's history. So they're looking at a significant increase in the amount of energy that's going to be required to support the grid. And so as such, right, we can expect more energy projects coming. If commercial scale wind turbines were to be proposed, we are looking for them to adhere to a 1,000-meter minimum setback to settlement areas. What happened during the last projects was that both on the west end of Crediton and at the north end of Grand Bend, those wind turbines were established at more minimal distances, which does impact those settlement areas from a growth perspective. And so we'd like to see 1,000 meters be respected. Again, during the last iterations, the Green Energy Act overrode any of our official plan policy. So even if we had had that policy in place, it wouldn't have made a difference. This time, the Green Energy Act has been repealed, which is why it's really important that municipalities have an energy framework in place in both your official plan and your zoning bylaw so that it's applicable law when these projects come through. If and when they come through, I should say. Finally, one other note, we did see more support for compressed air energy storage in former petroleum resource operations. So you'll note there is a new appendices to the official plan, which looks at where are the petroleum resource operations in South Huron. We have had one proposal to date. Now that was in Blue Water in the former Stanley ward, where they were looking to utilize the former natural gas vault to store compressed air energy. We have one other facility in the county that is operational. It was sort of a mini project, if you will, and it is in Goderich, and it utilizes a former salt brine well to store compressed energy. So there are new things coming all the time. And what I think is important here is that we are prepared and we've contemplated what some of the options are and provided clear direction one way or the other. Yes, happy to take questions throughout.
Councillor Oak, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So the wind turbine you mentioned, in the north part of Grand Bend there, so there are existing ones there. Now at the new PPS, does it address, is it just for the 1,000-meter setback you're talking about? Is it for existing ones or new ones? Like, so if there's existing ones and somebody wanted to put residential, how far away do they have to be?
Mhm.
If it's an existing one.
So the provincial planning statement is silent in regards to any setback requirements. That's set through a Class EA process. So for the turbines north of Grand Bend, they have a 550 meter, but there's no required reciprocal distance. That's a concept that from a land use planners, we think is a good idea. So the idea is that the turbine has to stay 550 meters away from any sensitive receptor, and a sensitive receptor should have to stay the same distance away from the turbine. However, certainly there is opportunity for noise studies to be done that would look at what would be any potential impacts of reducing that number. And as we saw with the Soul Haven development, they were able to show there would be no negative impact to a minor reduction to that number. So I guess what I'm saying is that, yes, the Class EA is going to set what that number is from turbine to sensitive receptor. What we're saying is that when new projects are contemplated, we would like them to look at the settlement area boundaries. So not where there's actual development, but where the boundaries are in South Huron. And we'd like them to plan from that point out 1,000 meters to ensure that we're not inhibiting or undermining an investment a community has made, for example, let's say in infrastructure, and now we're not able to realize that investment because of the impact of a turbine. Does that make sense? Okay.
Thanks, Denise.
Wonderful.
Go ahead.
Okay, so some of the other changes, we might just go to the map document for a minute. I will, while Selena's on petroleum, sorry, Selena, before I have you move on. This is a new appendix that's been added since the second draft, and again, shows where the petroleum resources are in South Huron. Now, some of these will be abandoned wells, but it's good for us to know from a planning standpoint that we don't lose sight of where any of these wells have been throughout history. Certainly, as we move down towards the Lambton border, there are far more. And specifically just southwest of Greenway, we have included those wells that are within 500 meters of the municipal boundary. There is quite a pocket there. And again, we just want to be mindful and thinking about where we do have concentrations of petroleum wells, and just making sure that we're being thoughtful about that when future development is proposed. Okay. So we'd like to talk about some of the changes to the settlement areas or to the But I think before we go to that, I wonder if we might switch over to the map documents, so that we might have an opportunity just to walk through each of the settlement areas. Many are remaining the same as they were in the first draft, but I thought I would just take the opportunity to maybe walk through some of them, and then we can speak specifically about the settlement areas that staff are seeking direction on. So we will go to Schedule B to get started, and I will draw your eye to a couple of properties. So generally, the Schedule B has been very well received. The delineation of natural environment mapping has been well received. We haven't had any requests for changes to that. One change we did note is at the corner of McTaggart and Kirkton Road, so in the Usborne ward, which is perhaps locally best known as the Prout properties. So those properties formerly in the first draft were still designated mineral aggregate. So what we've been made aware is that the licenses have been surrendered on those properties. And so it gave us an opportunity to actually had the opportunity to go out and sit down with all of the landowners in that section and that concession and have a discussion about what this would look like moving forward. You'll now note that the property is no longer designated mineral aggregate, but rather is designated a combination of agriculture and what's called water body post-mineral extraction. What I want to bring to council's attention, there's a new section that speaks to this in the official plan. The reason for the specific delineation of this water body and any other water bodies, quite frankly, in South Huron that have been created as a result of mineral extraction below the water table is that it is our understanding that the Conservation Authorities Act does not apply to those parcels. What we recognize, however, is that there are very important sources of both groundwater and surface water. And so we want to be very thoughtful again about if development is proposed in proximity, how are we planning for those spaces with the recognition that our conservation authority partners will not be playing the same role as there would be if there was a naturally occurring water body, let's say a large pond on a farm, for example. So that is a difference there. We walk through some of the other maps. Okay, so Exeter, couple changes want to draw your eye to. So on the right-hand side of the map, as we head out Huron Street, there is a expansion to the settlement area that is aligned with the water wastewater master plan, as we heard earlier this evening. That's been very well received. We had many members of the public come in, both the landowners as well as abutting landowners, folks who would live sort of within the established residential areas, just asking some general questions, but very well received. And I think sort of an understanding in the community that that's where they anticipated Exeter was going to grow. And so we've had no concerns raised. At the south end, we have brought in the church that's on the south border. It is already serviced by municipal water and sewer. In previous years, they had come in to talk about some options for that property. And because they weren't within the formal settlement area boundary, it was causing some issues. And so I think this is a very nice way of tidying that up. Just before we leave that one, sorry, Councillor Oak's question earlier, the north end is absolutely being saved for industrial. So the pink is highway commercial and that sort of yellowy orange is the industrial. So from our perspective, the white on this map is residential, and there's the white is only as you move further south. On those properties, we have to be very thoughtful about how we transition from an industrial use to a residential use. We have what's called D6 series guidelines from the Ministry of Environment that we follow, but we always want to be very careful if there is the suggestion of incorporating, let's say, for example, somebody wanted to build a highway commercial development on the main floor, and let's say up above, they wanted to put residential units. That could be very plausible, but we would first want to look at, would there be any negative impact, for example, on an abutting industrial property from being able to accommodate a full suite of uses? So no different than the apartment building that is currently at the corner of 4 and 83, a similar planning analysis would have been done in that case. Okay, so Centralia, at the south end of Centralia, so between the current settlement area boundary and the beginning of the Dashwood Industries property, there was one property that was sort of in the middle. Full municipal services do run past that property's door, and we saw this as an opportunity to expand the Centralia settlement area specifically for employment uses. This has been in direct response to comments received in Huron Park, in that there have been a number of new investments in Huron Park in recent years, but that there are not a lot of lands available for new investment. And so we want to make sure that, you know, within a reasonable geography, that we can make some other opportunities available for employment uses. We're going to come back to Crediton just because we have a longer conversation here. Dashwood. Dashwood was one of the settlement areas in the 2014 review that was significantly shrunk, if you will. So council at that time looked at doing a right sizing where they said, okay, we have this amount of land in Dashwood. In fact, we don't believe we need that for the long term. There has been, so that's, again, that's sort of how it is on the books today. But there was a request from one of the landowners, Mr. Hayter, to add a small area in for the settlement area at the south end of Dashwood. Staff were agreeable to that, but certainly did note for him that there is a former landfill on the property immediately abutting to the south that would need to be addressed at the time of development. Okay, Huron Park. The only thing we're not really changing the settlement area boundary here, just certainly wanting to reflect that on the left-hand side of your screen, so on the west side, all of those lands are going to be coming into the settlement area more or less to recognize that that buffer space is required for the noise exposure forecasts and the runways. So it's really more of a map cleanup than anything. We're going to come back to Greater Grand Bend just because we have, again, a longer conversation. So no changes here. Oh, sorry, small change in Shipka, which I'll let Selena speak to. She spoke with that landowner.
Sure, thank you. So just a minor shift that I would consider to be a land swap in Shipka. It's actually the same property that's affected, but just the existing designation on the north here is sort of ineffective from a development perspective. It's not accessible by road, so it kind of becomes a little bit useless, to be honest, for that landowner. So looking to just swing those lands down to the south to back onto his existing lands that front onto Shipka Line so that he can make the most use of those lands. So no net increase or decrease for that landowner, just a change in dimension at the end of the day.
Sorry about that. No changes here in Mount Carmel. No changes here either. And all good in Mount Carmel. That's Corbett, sorry. Yes. And Elamville, no changes in Elamville at this time. Kirkton Woodham, we did have, so no change. Oh, sorry, at the north part of the screen, the Kirkton Woodham complex over the community center and the library is, that property for whatever reason was cut in half. And so we were just fully bringing that property into the settlement area boundary. And no changes here. Okay, so we might go back to the PowerPoint at this point, and then we can talk a little bit more about Crediton and Greater Grand Bend. Okay. So in the first draft, we had looked at the overall growth projections for Centralia, for Huron Park, and for Crediton. What we found was that in both Huron Park and in Centralia, there were reasonable opportunities for residential growth. You know, there were opportunities for some newer plans. There was opportunities for rounding out, infilling, intensification. And so the decision was that, you know, there's sufficient lands available in both. When we arrived at Crediton, what we saw was a 200-acre future development land designation. And so we started kind of going back through time to understand how did we arrive at such a large version of Crediton. And part of it really does go back to the 1978 Stevens Secondary Plan. Then the lands south of the county road were brought in 2003. And so this is a sort of an accumulation of decisions over time, I would say, that's ended up with a bit of a legacy issue. Now, I'm not to say that South Huron is the only place that would have something like this. You certainly are not. But what I think is fair is that we want to be transparent about what our population and projections are telling us, what our housing forecasts are telling us, and what the existing servicing design can handle, essentially. And so when we took a look at Crediton, we said, you know, there are far more lands designated for growth than we anticipate would be required even in 30 years. We're looking at, if we look at on average, there's been 1 unit per year developed over the past 15 years. I think I gave council a very conservative estimate the last time we talked and said, even if we had developed at 1 acre per year, that means we have 200 years of growth in Crediton, and we're meant to have a maximum of 30. So again, this is a legacy issue. There are many communities that find themselves in these situations. I think the importance is to be transparent. So we also wanted to look at the lands designated and said, okay, from a technical perspective, are there reasons why some of these lands simply wouldn't be conducive to development? Are there reasonable access? Is it financially viable? So for example, would you be able to achieve looping? Could you achieve double-sided development, for example? So we took a lens and sort of looked at we have too much land to begin with. If we were going to de-designate, are there any technical factors that would draw us to one property as opposed to another? The property at the southeast corner has had development in recent years, albeit at a minor, modest rate. So there's been approximately 10 lots registered over the past 10 years, and there's another 5 sort of draft plan approved to move forward. But again, there's been sort of this moderate rate of growth at this southeast corner. So if Selena wants to put up the map, so what we initially looked at as well was the servicing design. And in past iterations of the Water Wastewater Master Plan, the lands to the northeast were not included. There were other maps where we could see it had been included in part. So we started over on the west side and we said, look, at the northwest corner, these lands do not have frontage onto a road. It would not be easy to bring a road back to any one of these properties given the level of fragmentation in the northwest corner, and we would recommend that we de-designate. That remains our recommendation. At the southwest, again, we looked at where that landowner had frontage onto both the county road and then the King Street. And we said, let's leave those spaces because those future lots already front onto a public road. There's already hydro and natural gas and whatever other infrastructure is there. So let's leave those, but we would de-designate sort of what's in behind it. And that's against remain staff's recommendation. At the southeast, again, that's the property that's had some modest rate of development. That landowner has provided a concept plan for the entirety of the property being developed, and that property was entirely included in both the past and current water wastewater master plan. It's designed essentially into the existing system, though I would note that no allocation has been given, which is really important. We don't allocate until the time of actual development, but it conceivably could be brought on. So then we move to the northeast, and this is the subject property on which council received correspondence at your August council meeting, in which this landowner received the proposal to de-designate the entirety of those lands and were not in favor of that proposal. We noted for them that they do not have access onto King Street, that their only road access is Ebler Street, which is at best 10 meters wide. A standard municipal road is 20 meters wide. I took the opportunity to drive down Ebler Street, take a walk, and expand or doubling the width of that road would not be easily done given the existing dwellings and accessory structures. Also, there's a change in grade on this property such that it will be more challenging to service. Now, nothing is ever impossible from an engineering standpoint, but what we heard about in the previous presentation was that we want to think about how we can effectively service future growth, but also hopefully find some efficiencies, again, for ourselves and for the development community so that development can be financially viable. The landowner expressed to us through their planner and their engineers that they felt that there could be a way to service this. They are proposing a bit of a swap that would allow them access onto King Street at the north end to help to address some of those access concerns that we have. They also indicated that they felt it was unfair that their property was being entirely de-designated while other lands were not. So, as a result of that conversation, staff sort of went back, we took another look at the numbers and we said, okay, does it make sense to de-designate this entirely, or could we sort of live with a reduced option? And that's what we're submitting as options B and C this evening. So in addition to meeting with staff, the developer's planner brought forward a concept plan for this property that would show how it could be developed. We certainly took a look at that concept plan to think about, okay, where would they be looking to achieve future access points? How could we yield sort of a financially and technically viable development? And so that's how we arrived at these two options for de-designation. Basically, if we were to de-designate too far, it starts to really limit some of the technical options for looping, for access. And if we also limit it too far from a de-designation, the financial viability will also go. So that's why they are smaller de-designations. Option B would seek to bring, to sort of cut it back from the east. And option C looks to reduce more from the north side, but still maintain all the way over to the east. As the pumping station is further to the east, for those of you who know where it is in Crediton, there's a possibility, right? They could work with the neighboring farmer and take an easement through their farm and then drop it south to the pump station. So we were trying to think about, again, technical and financial viability, and also what represents good land use planning. So from staff's perspective, we are looking, I suppose, for an indication from committee as to your wish in terms of Crediton. I think staff are in, I would, difficult to say in favor. We are in favor of providing transparent information. So what we'd like to make clear is that, number one, we have too much land designated in Crediton, even with the reduced options before you. So just as long as everyone's aware, Crediton is over designated based on projected growth. The second is that the existing wastewater system that you have in Crediton is not large enough to bring on all of these lands. So we want to make sure that that's made really clear to anyone who owns development land so that people are going into the decisions with that full body of information. If they're choosing to make an investment decision, for example, they're doing it with eyes wide open, as it were. So I think that's what's important from a planning sense to me. I would be uncomfortable leaving the full designation and not providing, again, that more transparent information, to the members of the public, to potential purchasers of that property, just to make sure they know these are sort of the situation that we find ourselves in. As staff, I do think that either option B or option C would be something we're willing to consider. If we had indication from council that's something you would like us to explore, we would then go back to the landowner, to their developer, and to their planner to see, how does this then respond? Is there an option that they would prefer?
Thank you, Mayor. So with that slide up, option C, just for clarification, so the way this looks is there'd be a bit removed from the one in the northeast corner, the north part there. And then the southwest and the northwest, those two both would be removed? Is that what, and has there been any discussion with those property owners about removal of their properties?
Yes, there has been. So they were sent direct letters from planning staff, which was the case with anyone who had a settlement area boundary adjustment on their property. Those letters went out actually in advance of the first draft to make sure that they weren't finding out that their property was subject to discussions at a council meeting. We have had an opportunity to discuss with both. I would describe their response as perhaps mixed. The one I think has indicated they didn't necessarily have any intention of doing development themselves, but they did sort of like that it was there. I think the other was sort of the opinion that so long as the lands that were along the roadways remain designated, that was more of their interest. Again, I wouldn't say that either was thrilled with the proposal to de-designate, but I think they sort of understood where staff were coming from.
Councillor Oak.
Yeah, thank you. So if we were to choose option C, for example, I know the idea is to try not to take any more farmland out of production than we need to. And I know that there's some land that we're looking at on the outskirts of Exeter, and there's some in the Grand Bend area on Mullard and that. How does that compare with adding those, our net difference? Where are we at the plus minus sort of thing? Any idea?
Denise.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I actually haven't run the plus minus. I would say at this side, we're certainly on the plus, but I wouldn't say that I necessarily would compare Crediton to either Exeter or to Grand Bend, to be honest. They're separate growth areas. And so from my perspective, by de-designating Crediton, as a planning staff, we're not using that as justification to then expand Grand Bend or to then expand Exeter. They're standing on sort of their own 2 feet, as it were, in terms of what is the projected growth for those separate communities. This is more about, again, as I say, really right sizing what we think the future of Crediton will actually look like and conveying that to current landowners.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Other than the sewer system here, Denise, what's it really hurting to leave it the way it is?
Denise.
It's a fair question. A couple of things. So I think it's beyond provincial planning direction, but I think it also can potentially be misleading if we leave lands designated that in fact have no real potential for development in terms of the need for growth. I think it can maybe be misconstrued when people think about selling that property as to what is the value of the property. If it's inside a settlement area boundary, one would think it has significantly higher value, when in fact, what we know is that there isn't sufficient growth to justify all those lands being in, and there isn't a easily serviced answer, at least for the parcel to the north. I think that's the potential harm.
Councillor Dietrich.
Well, we just got done discussing a 100-year deal here before you sat in. So like in 100 years, you think there's no potential for this? This is kind of a zip question. Who would know?
It's a different exercise, right? So infrastructure looks at 100 years, planning, we're tasked at looking between 20 and 30. So you're right, none of us have a crystal ball, but it's to say at this point, when we look out to 2051, we do not anticipate crediting growing by this extent. So to Councillor Dietrich's question, is it possible that we could shrink a settlement area and then in 50 years' time, there'd be a council sitting here saying, we're now going to have to grow the same settlement area back out? It is possible.
And Denise, you said something too about at the current rate, it's at a 200-year current rate. Is that correct? What's been built already there?
So they're growing at 1 unit per year over the past 15 years. So there's been approximately 15 new dwellings established in Crediton over 15 years.
And comparing that to Exeter, for instance, be a bigger difference, correct? More houses been built in Exeter in that 15-year period than in Crediton.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Oak.
Yes, but to be fair, 10 of those houses have been built in probably the last 2. So, you know, things are changing. You can't compare to the last 10 years of what didn't happen there either. I guess the question I had was, if it's in the settlement area, that doesn't mean that it has to be residential either. Like there could be somebody that wants to put a plant there that has water and sewer access, you know, or something in that property, right? It doesn't have to be residential. If they wanted to, if they went through all the processes of being zoned and, you know, or whatever.
Comment, Denise?
That's correct. The designations in the secondary settlement areas as well as tertiary are urban. So we don't differentiate land use at an official plan level. We just leave that to a zoning level. So yes, it's absolutely possible if someone wanted to establish a new tractor dealership, right? They could choose to locate in Crediton. That would certainly, yes, that could be established. Again, looking at abutting uses and access. I mean, the issues that we identify with the parcel to the northeast, I mean, access is required for any type of development. Currently, there is not viable access to that parcel. We will have to make changes to the official plan in order to achieve access.
The reason I asked that is because of all the maps that are out there that we're looking at, there isn't a lot of employment lands that we're looking at changing right at the moment or adding. We've got the Centralia little piece there. Everything else is already, well, maybe the north of Exeter, the northwest, that's the industrial area potentially in there. But there's no new employment lands per se in Huron Park that we're looking at right at the moment. So I'm just asking, is there been any thought about expanding some more? Because if we're going to grow or grow, a lot of it has to be employment driven too. We got to have land for employers to expand as well, right? So.
Yeah, certainly opportunity to develop complete communities is absolutely the goal, including employment uses. We are making some changes within the Grand Bend airport property, Motorplex property, a minor change there to enhance the employment opportunities. Again, it's not as though there aren't any lands in Huron Park. It's just the lands designated for industrial are not currently available to the market, predominantly being the former Centralia College property. When we look at Exeter, it's not as though we don't have sufficient employment lands, but as I noted during our last committee of the whole, it's that they're very large contiguous properties. We don't have sort of smaller shovel-ready properties ready for industrial or employment uses. And so I think that might be more of the limiting factor when we look at employment.
Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you. Okay, so you were talking awfully fast, Denise. I was trying to keep up. The options B and C for Crediton, particularly just around the northeast pieces. We're not talking about the west at all. Were you saying that you said we were looking at infrastructure capability or capacity. So for those lands, in option B and option C, do we actually have sufficient infrastructure, pipes in the ground, to be able to service those should they be developed?
And this is where the director of development decides not to be a planner, and I'm not going to be a director of development, but the short answer would be no. We do not have the pipes, nor do we have capacity within the existing force mains or in the sewage pumping station to take on all of the lands that are currently designated within Crediton.
Including what is to the south of Victoria. So
So they showed on the map that the number of units that would be permitted in Crediton. So I wrote that down. So they said that we would have enough to service 104 acres or 42.3 hectares, 345 units. So 104 acres. We're looking to de-designate less than 100. So we would still have over 100 acres designated, where you have 104 acres able to be serviced based on the water wastewater master plan. Yes.
Okay.
okay.
Follow-up?
Yeah, I'm just trying to mentally get a handle on what we're actually saying here. So we're saying that looking at option A picture, where we're taking all of that land out, the land that's remaining in the settlement area, we have enough capacity from an infrastructure perspective to service that land?
Correct. The acreage as a total, yes.
Okay. So we're okay there, but the moment we start looking at the a piece of land that is to the north and east, we don't have enough to bring in that land.
What's important to know is it's already,
Acreage-wise.
yeah, it's already in today. So it's already been designated all this time as part of Crediton.
Yes.
So it's already in. So the wastewater master plan is essentially saying you have 104 acres of land that can be serviced. It doesn't necessarily say which 104, though there are reasons relating to force mains and sewage pumping stations why one would potentially be easier than another. So I think what I'm looking for from council at this standpoint, within the first draft, we had said de-designate entirely. We've heard back from the landowner that's clearly not in alignment with their wishes. We have now identified some other options. What I'm looking for from council, I suppose, at this point is if you wanted planning staff to abandon the changes entirely, if that's council's wish and council knows what their wish is at this juncture, it would be appropriate for you to provide some level of staff or some level of direction to staff. The other option would be we proceed on with the complete de-designation. From a staff perspective, I think either B or C, so going back with some type of option for de-designated, reducing that de-designation, I think is something that staff could live with, provided it's, at that same time, it's that transparent information going with it. It's to say, okay, we chose not to de-designate the whole parcel. We de-designated in part, but please be very aware, this is beyond our growth projections. This is beyond our existing servicing design. And the reason this is being left on the books has more to do with the legacy of the designations in the settlement area than it certainly does with provincial planning conformity.
Councillor Oak.
Yeah, in my mind, I think option C is the better option because it allows the potential to go down towards the maybe an easement with that neighboring farmer to more access options to take it further down, further east. Versus where it's blocked off there if you take the north and south part of that east chunk. this allows them to run across along their land potentially.
Okay, thank you. Well, any other questions,
That's-
Councillor Vaughn?
Yeah, just again, following with the access question and the potential farmer down the road, is there actually a deal with a farmer right now, or that really is a potential down the road? We're looking for somebody to help us with access to this land.
Yeah, there would be a various series of servicing strategies they would have to look through, no different than the water wastewater master plan, to see which could be achieved, which would be the most expensive. The other thing I would note about option C is it does provide them more frontage along the county road. If you think about having to achieve a secondary access off the county road, if Ebler Street cannot be widened to be sufficient, is there another opportunity for them to purchase a property along that section of the county road to get access up to the north? That's a potential, a viable option they did discuss at the meeting. But as you can appreciate, they're not looking to action that until they find out what's going to happen from this process. So that certainly was a suggestion from staff that was made, and they were open to the idea, was to say, is there the opportunity to purchase, as I say, another property to get themselves from the subject lands south to the county road?
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Thanks, Denise.
Okay, we'll proceed on to Greater Grand Bend. So in the first draft, council saw an expansion of what is now being called Greater Grand Bend along County Road 81. So to the east of Grand Bend, or Lambton Shores side of Grand Bend, I should say, and then south along Mallard Line. So we remain with the recommendation to bring in the property immediately east on the north side of County Road 81 that is immediately adjacent to the existing built-out development in Lambton Shores. And so its contiguous development certainly represents good planning. As we move south on Mallard Line, the first property, we have received a request from the owner of that developer to bring their lands into the settlement area, as it is also adjacent to their lands that have been developed or are being developed on the Lambton Shore side of the boundary. So we also looked at bringing in lands as we moved further south on Mallard Line for a couple of reasons. One, the opportunity again for sort of contiguous growth and sort of thinking about how could we sort of work towards sort of a complete community, compact form, walkable between both the South Huron side of the line and the Lambton Shores side of what is Grand Bend. What I'd also bring to your attention in discussions with Lambton Shores staff is that they did indicate to us that at the time of development of the lands that's immediately to the west, they failed to leave a road stub to the south. What it means is that they really don't have any viable access to the lands that could be the future development lands on the Lambton Shores side of the line, and they would certainly appreciate cooperation in allowing access through South Huron lands over to Mallard Line. So you'll notice there's a new section that's been written in the official plan where we discuss Greater Grand Bend, and we talk about the fact that when we speak about a complete community, we're not planning for a complete community on the South Huron side of the line. We're seeking for complete community as Grand Bend as a whole. And we're looking at this as a cross-border planning area. It's not something I've had the opportunity to do as of yet in my career. I'll be honest, I haven't seen a lot of examples of this, but it's an excellent example of where two communities, again, we have the county boundary as it is between Lambton and Huron, between Lambton Shores and South Huron, and how can we really serve this community as a whole and not duplicate efforts on both sides of that line? So in the open houses, I did certainly have the opportunity to speak with the landowner, but we also heard from neighbors and other folks. And part of the concern was that, did we need to go that far down Mallard Line? It did feel like it was a lot of agricultural land potentially coming out of production, and it wasn't justified perhaps just yet. So we did revisit the numbers, and we have reduced the extent of the designation south on Mallard Line. I would say that still aligns with the goals of the landowner, but responds to concerns from neighbors. As well, it does still allow for contiguous development over to Lambton Shores to provide that access. So on the left-hand side of your screen is what was proposed, and on the right-hand side is what we're proposing now. So it is less overall. If we go to the north side of Greater Grand Bend, so we received, after the first draft, and even after some of the open houses, we had a series of meetings with our partners at the Ministry of Transportation. And we received feedback from them in that they were concerned with the expansion of what was a highway commercial and residential designation north of the Soul Haven property. So what the ministry came back with was that major entrances along the Highway 21 corridor are required to be a minimum of 800 meters apart. What we were proposing did not meet that. Further, they were unwilling to be supportive of any specific land use designations without supportive traffic impact studies. So what that means is that in order to put a highway commercial designation, they wanted to know what were the specific highway commercial uses. Was it a gas station? Was it a hotel? Was it a series of drive-through restaurants? So that they could do their analysis. Certainly from our perspective, we don't know what those would be. And so we've had to go back with much more of a modified approach than what we had originally envisioned. So north of Soul Haven, we are proposing that we would designate, but it will only be an urban designation. It basically suggests this is an area where we have done infrastructure planning. This is an area where we do anticipate seeing growth, but we're not able at this time to put any specific land use designations. It will be urban. At the time that development comes forward, they will be required to do both an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment, as well as provide all those required technical studies. I will say what it does do well. It certainly connects up to the south bit of the Home Hardware property. And so what we have along this section of Highway 21 is sort of, again, a bit of a legacy issue. It's a history of scattered highway commercial development on the east side of 21. This at least sort of helps to show moving forward, this is where we see the urban boundary over the next 30 years. We fully recognize that within the area being proposed to be designated urban, we do have 3 wind turbines in proximity, as well as a significant, we have a water course with some Conservation Authority regulated land. So that will all also need to be taken into consideration at the time of development. This was sort of staff's best possible way to address what we heard back from the Ministry of Transportation.
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next slide is just basically giving you a better impact of the area that looks to be designated. As I say, it does connect from Soul Haven up to the south portion of Home Hardware and sort of shows this is where future growth. Again, this will help us to ensure that moving forward, we do not see any wind turbines within 1,000 meters of this buffer. What you'll note, again, those wind turbines that we see on the screen were established in around 2010, 2012. At that time, in the South Huron official plan, this area had been conceived of for future development, but because it wasn't designated, it again wasn't considered by those turbines. So that's something we want to put in.
Councillor Oak.
Yeah, thank you. So across the road where the tennis courts and stuff are, what is the zoning on that?
So I'm going to have Selena bring that up for us if she can. It was already designated highway commercial, and there was a feeling at the meeting that that had been a change, but it had already been highway commercial. It just had been zoned for that more recreational use, but the designation had been highway commercial. It is proposed to remain highway commercial, but we noted that at the rear portion of that property, there is a floodplain. And so we've better denoted that on the map for folks to realize that the extent of the developable potential there is limited by that floodplain area.
So that's showing there on that map, but on your schedule H1, it's not showing.
So the 2 maps cut off. There's H1 and H2 for Greater Grand Bend, just because.
Okay, okay.
Because of the physical, the sort of the length of it from a GIS perspective, we wouldn't be able to see any detail if we tried to fit it all on one page. So that is why it's broken onto 2.
Thank you.
I would say that just interesting that you raised the tennis court lands. We did have a lot of discussion about it at the Lakeshore meeting. When I asked members of the public, there's a lot of comments that they were not satisfied with a highway commercial designation on the tennis court lands. And so in trying to understand what the concern was, I was expecting to hear noise and light, traffic disruptions, what I heard, the most common concern I heard was trespassing through the Oakwood Inn and the sort of the Oakwood Park property to the lake. So just to give a sense, council, there were a number of comments submitted in regards to not wanting highway commercial there. Again, difficult from us from a land use perspective to have control over things like trespassing. Certainly at the time of site plan, that's where we might be able to do some things in terms of the design of the property such that it would deter anyone who is looking to find their way to the beach. But I didn't see really anything we could do at the official plan stage that I thought would effectively address that issue.
Okay, thank you. Please continue.
So we'll just wrap things up in terms of our next steps. So we've reviewed with council, I think we can move on past this. We've reviewed with council the second draft, sort of what are the changes from a policy standpoint? What are the changes from a mapping standpoint? One thing that I think is very important that we do at this time is that prior to moving forward to our public meeting, typically when we do that, we would send correspondence to any agencies or abutting municipalities to seek their input at the public meeting. Rather than sending Lambton Shores simply the form, the standard message, I thought it would be appropriate that we engage from more of a political standpoint to let them know, we are looking at making some changes that are immediately on your border. Certainly, I've had an opportunity from a staff perspective to speak with the planner there, but I did think it was more appropriate that as a partner, we would send them a letter outlining what are some of the changes, what might be of most interest to them, and seeing what the feedback is from their council. So that is one of my recommendations this evening. We are looking for direction to receive the second draft of the revised official plan, to direct staff on mapping changes for Crediton and Greater Grand Bend, and finally to direct staff to move forward with scheduling the public meeting, with the goal being in December of 2024 if possible, or alternatively January of 2025.
Councilor Oak. Thanks, Denise. Microphone, Mike. Good.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So you noted that there was some written comments from you mentioned Watson Associates with the Avon Maitland School Board and talking about the schools. I guess was there any talk with the other school board to see what their thoughts are, and are there any indication that they're changing any of their ideas as far as schools? Because both Exeter Elementary it's projected to exceed capacity here based on your notes here. And then Precious Blood, I assume is in the same type of situation as well, because it wasn't that long ago they were working out of portables. So just wondering, is there any talk about them changing anything in there, or any thoughts from both school boards?
So we certainly circulated to both school boards. Typically, we hear back from Avon Maitland at a greater rate than we do from Huron Perth Catholic District School Board. Happy to follow up with them with a specific ask for their Exeter projections. So we can certainly do that, but typically we don't hear from the separated school board as often.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councilor Vaughn.
Yeah, again, in the Grand Bend area, back in August, when we were having the official, or when we had the open house, we were talking about the additions of settlement areas, and we were also talking about it being potentially commercial. And I realize that's kind of changed now. At the time, I thought part of that commercial discussion was because of some of the feedback that was received from the people in Lambton Shores, like the staff wanting us to designate it that kind of use. Now MTO has basically said we want to leave it sort of on a application basis because we want to see traffic studies, to try to understand. So basically it's back to left open up in the air, that we don't really know how those additional lands that are being added to the settlement area are going to eventually be designated. So MTO obviously has a bit of sway in terms of telling us how we should be planning for that particular area, or at least that's the impression I'm getting. So I'm just thinking again in terms of planning for a whole neighborhood type of feeling. And even though this is mixed bag between Lambton Shores and South Huron, I'm thinking about connectivity. And is MTO going to have say in terms of our ability to put a bike path or a walking path from even the Tridon lands to get people safely into the Grand Bend, greater Grand Bend market area? Because from the get-go on those lands, I've been concerned about putting a whole neighborhood in the middle of a field with basically no way to get to town other than to walk on paved shoulders, which are, according to MTO, traffic lanes. So I'm kind of wondering, like, to navigate our way through, how do we connect pedestrian and cyclists to the Grand Bend area? How do we do that with MTO having a lot to say about that particular area?
Mhm. So the Director of Development certainly sat in on all consultations with MTO, so it certainly would open up the opportunity for him to provide comment as well. What was made very clear at the MTO was that there is certainly an opportunity when we're working with an urban cross-section. Where we're in a rural cross-section, there would be substantially different standards and different possibilities for things like connectivity or pedestrian connections and that sort of thing. So I think it has to do with the successive improvements to that cross-section over time that would bring it closer to an urban standard, while recognizing that South Huron does not have a connecting link where Lambton Shores does. So that is also part of the difference. What I would note in terms of the urban designation, whether we've been so in that portion of the OP policies, really encourage you to look at the requirements for new development. It's not as though it's left open for someone, for a developer to sort of decide what this area is going to look like. There are certainly qualifiers in terms of, you know, a range of uses. We do not want to see, yes, we want to see more highway commercial oriented uses. We do not want to see any core commercial uses that would compete with Grand Bend's main strip. Where we see residential, we want connected community trail, integrated community trail with destinations. So things like a park, for example. We want to make sure that we have sufficient trees. So there is certainly language there that any future development, even if it's within the proposed urban designation, would still have to fall in line with. And that section was written with the benefit of input from that immediate community. So just encourage you, if you're taking another read through, do look at that section. Again, with MTO, I don't want to give the impression that they said that they weren't willing to look at development in this area. They just want to qualify it that obviously what's been allowed historically along Highway 21 with sort of random development and not proper intersections from their perspective, that's no longer able to occur. And so we do need to adhere more so to their spacing requirements, to their turning movements and turning lanes and all of those things. So there is definitely a different standard moving forward. And I do think that this urban designation is sort of what we as staff could identify as a best sort of middle ground between what MTO was willing to support and what we heard from council and the community.
Okay, thank you. Follow up?
No,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you. Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. We have to look at an option for A, B, or C. So discussion on that. Councillor Oak, go ahead.
I'd move option C.
Any discussion on option C, Deputy? You second it? Second by Deputy. Any discussion on that? Yeah, I'll call the question to agree with option C. Carries with 5. All in favor there? Okay. Thank you very much. And we'll move to Ms. Masula Carlson to read the recommendation, please.
I might split this up if that's okay with the committee. The that South Huron Committee of the Whole receive the second draft of the revised official plan and presentation of Selena McIntosh, Huron County Planner, Denise Van Amersfoort, Huron County Manager of Planning, and that the committee recommend to council that staff proceed with option C for the mapping changes for the Crediton settlement area and the mapping changes for the Greater Grand Bend settlement area as outlined in the planner report dated October 8th, 2024. And that staff send correspondence to Lambton Shores Council to solicit feedback on the draft official plan review as a partner municipality, and that the statutory public meeting for the purpose of obtaining public feedback regarding the proposed official plan amendment be scheduled for December 2024 or January 2025.
And a mover, please. Moved by Counselor Dietrich, seconded by Deputy Mayor. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Carries with 5. Thank you. 5, please.
That's South Huron Committee of the Whole does now adjourn at 6:25 PM.
Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Counselor Dietrich. No discussion, call the question, all in favor? That carries with 5. Thank you, and thank you very much, staff, for presenting, and members of the public